I'll blow your fucking brains out, bitch! The cop roared, his trembling finger on the trigger, pressed tight against the temple of the black woman sitting silently in her car. He smirked with contempt, believing his badge and the color of his skin granted him absolute impunity, allowing him to dictate the life and death of those weaker than him in broad daylight. But he had made a fatal mistake. The woman showed no fear. Her pupils didn't dilate. Her heart rate didn't quicken. In that cold, suspended moment, she saw through the cowardice in his eyes and the unsteady aim of his gun. She was no victim. She was Aisha Thorne, a legendary Delta Force sniper in deep cover. A swift, decisive joint lock brought the cop down, the dry crunch of breaking bones signaling a reversal of power. But that victory was merely a spark, igniting a far more brutal war. As an entire clandestine organization called the Watchmen began to rise, hunting her and her little daughter. When the law protects the wicked, will a mother's assassin skills be enough to reclaim justice? Or will this be the end of her career and her life? If that was your mother with a gun to her head, would you stand by or fight? Tell us honestly in the comments below. And watch until the end, because the next part isn't for the faint of heart. The Dawn in Oakwood Heights was an expensive oil painting, where the early sunlight glided over perfectly trimmed lawns, creating a manufactured serenity that felt untouchable. The air carried the faint scent of newly watered grass, as if even the weather had been choreographed to please the wealthy. This was the territory of the accomplished, the type of people who wore privilege like an heirloom passed down through generations. Rules were optional here, mere suggestions reshaped around power. And within that curated stillness, Aisha Thorne moved like a misaligned brushstroke, an outsider in every sense, except the precision of her self-control. She ran with steady, measured breaths, the rhythm of her footsteps blending into the quiet of the tree-lined street. To passing strangers, she appeared like any dedicated morning jogger, keeping up with a ritual. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was a disciplined machine, always scanning, always alert. Escape routes were subconsciously mapped, blind corners analyzed, potential threats catalogued the way Delta operatives were trained to do even in sleep. Her cover as a single mother demanded perfection, and perfection required vigilance. Yet perfection shattered in an instant. A heavy blue and white police cruiser lurched forward from a side street, cutting across her path with a jolt that felt intentional. Tires screeched against the asphalt, echoing unnaturally loud in the pristine morning. Birds scattered from nearby branches, their sudden flight a punctuation to the hostility erupting from the quiet. This was no coincidence. It was a move with purpose, rude, aggressive, territorial. Sergeant Garrett Reed stepped out of the vehicle, slamming the door harder than necessary, as though force could announce his authority. His boots thudded heavily on the pavement, each step carrying the weight of resentment he had nurtured since their last clash. Oakwood Heights' polished calm transformed into a stage where his frustration took center spotlight. He had hunted her down deliberately, driven not by duty, but by the simmering hatred that had been building inside him like a slow-boiling storm. The air grew tighter as Garrett advanced, thick with the sharp scent of anger and the subtle metallic trace of his gear. He radiated something far removed from law enforcement, something feral, like a predator reclaiming wounded pride. His jaw clenched, a tick flickering near the corner of his eye, revealing how deeply Aisha's existence offended him. His anger was personal, embedded in the humiliation she had caused him before. He stopped just an arm's length from her, heat radiating from his body, as if rage itself increased his temperature. "You think this neighborhood is for people like you?" he snarled, his voice tearing the air like a jagged rip across silk. The words were heavy with the stench of discrimination and a twisted hunger for dominance. "I am the law here. Get on your knees." His shout ricocheted down the empty street, bouncing off manicured hedges and pristine windows. Aisha didn't flinch. Her stillness was unnerving, too controlled, too deliberate. She met his gaze with calm, her eyes cold, analytical, and detached. Internally, gears shifted with the speed of a combat computer. Analyze threat level, assess legal grounds, identify tactical advantage. She answered with measured logic, her voice steady like a metronome. "Which law have I violated, Sergeant? What is the reason for detainment? Do you have authorization?" Each question was a scalpel, slicing into his already fragile authority. Cornered by her composure, Garrett's restraint collapsed. He lunged, his hand shooting forward, fingers clamping around her arm like a heated shackle. His grip was rough, unprofessional, and fully driven by emotion, an act that violated every protocol he pretended to represent. The contrast was stark. His burning rage against her cold precision. Aisha reacted before his brain could process his own mistake. With a sharp, efficient movement, she pivoted her weight, sliding out of his grasp using a minimal force technique designed to neutralize without escalation. His balance tipped, his hand grasping nothing but air. Shock washed over his face. That tiny motion exposed a truth he wasn't prepared to face. She wasn't a civilian he could intimidate. Humiliation scorched him deeper than physical pain. His pride, already fragile, snapped. Rage overtook reason. He reached for his holster with a frantic, irreversible decision. His fingers wrapped around the gun's grip, trembling not with fear, but with unstable fury. As the firearm cleared the holster, the morning serenity fractured into shards of danger. A metallic click echoed through Oakwood Heights, sharp as a blade. Garrett pointed the weapon at her chest, his eyes wild, desperate to claim dominance through sheer force. His face twisted into a mask of challenge, expecting fear. But Aisha's gaze remained unchanged, calm, cold, impenetrable. The stillness in her eyes told him the truth he could not stand. She was not prey. She never had been. The metallic click of the freshly chambered round rang sharply through the still air. But inside Aisha's mind, that sound vanished into absolute silence. The world dimmed at its edges, entering the unique cognitive space known only to people trained to stay functional under imminent death. Movement slowed, colors dulled, and time stretched into long, clear frames where nothing existed except variables to calculate. She did not perceive a gun aimed at her as a threat, only as data. Garrett Reed stood before her with a weapon extended, but in her perception he was still several stages away from lethal action. Her mind ignited with terrifying speed, each thought slicing through information with surgical precision. She scanned every micro-expression and tension point on Garrett's body, her gaze dissecting him with clinical brutality. She wasn't searching for humanity. There was none. She was hunting for faults, inconsistencies, cracks in his unstable psyche. His shoulders were too tight, his breathing too shallow, and the tremor in his hand was not fear but emotional volatility. It was the tremor of someone who wanted dominance more than accuracy. His racking motion replayed in her mind, slowed down to a frame-by-frame analysis. It had been sloppy, lacking the firm decisiveness of someone accustomed to recoil management. The angle of his wrist signaled poor stability. His grip too high on the backstrap told her he had never mastered control of muzzle flip. These details didn't merely suggest incompetence. They proved he was bluffing, desperately hoping intimidation would substitute for skill. Aisha raised her eyes and locked onto his with frigid clarity. That look alone made Garrett's stance falter by half an inch, a tiny movement invisible to most, but glaring to her. She understood the psychology of men like him. Fragile authority wrapped in loud aggression. She could not give him time to reconsider, to steady himself, to rebuild the illusion of control. She needed him emotional, frantic, imprecise. So she struck directly at his foundation, his ego. "You are not fast enough. Your hand is shaking. Go ahead, shoot. I bet you miss." Her voice didn't rise. It descended, cold and steady, slicing into him with precision. The mockery was subtle but lethal. A challenge designed to twist inside him like a blade. She wasn't taunting him out of anger. She was weaponizing his pride, forcing him onto terrain where rage would override precision. In that territory, she held the advantage. Garrett's jaw clenched so tightly, the muscle along his cheek twitched. His lips curled, his eyes widened, and the color drained from his face only to be replaced by a flush of humiliation. She had exposed him not as a threat, but as a performer seeking validation. His breathing turned ragged, his thumb pressed too hard against the slide release, and he looked less like an officer with a gun than a man drowning in wounded masculinity. Then the unexpected shattered the moment. A piercing scream erupted from the side of the street. Mrs. Evelyn, the elderly neighbor who had been quietly tending her rose bushes. Her gardening gloves fell to the ground as she stared in horror at the scene, unfolding just a few yards away. Her scream wasn't just an alarm. It was a social verdict, a witness's condemnation. In Oakwood Heights, where appearances mattered more than morality, her voice carried the power of public scrutiny. Garrett's eyes flicked toward her instinctively. That fraction of a second was enough. Aisha moved, not an attack, not a jump, just a calculated shift of weight. She stepped a few inches to the right, her motion so subtle that an untrained eye might think she adjusted her stance out of discomfort. But Garrett was forced to adjust his aim, a micro-correction that exposed his lack of control even further. The situation was slipping from his grasp like sand through trembling fingers. His fury surged past the point of logic. The scream, Aisha's calm, her provocations, and the realization he was being watched. Everything collided inside him like a storm breaking against glass. His vision tunneled, and reason vanished, replaced by raw, exploding rage. He pulled the trigger out of panic, not mastery. The gunshot cracked through Oakwood Heights, with violent finality. The moment the bullet left the barrel, Aisha's world sharpened back into full clarity. She had known the shot would be misaligned. She had mapped the angles of deviation produced by his grip, wrist tension, and stance. Her body executed the movement she had already planned, a slight slide to the right, no more than the width of her shoulder, yet enough to slip out of death's path. The bullet cut through the air and struck the pavement, sending stone fragments skipping across the asphalt. Garrett stared at the space she no longer occupied, disbelief plastered across his face. His mouth hung open, and he looked at the gun as if it had betrayed him. Then he turned back to her, horror shifting into humiliation. She hadn't merely dodged, she had predicted his failure. For Garrett Reed, that was the deepest wound. He felt exposed not because he fired, but because she knew he would miss. The dry crack of the gunshot still lingered in the morning air, vibrating faintly against the polished windows and manicured hedges of Oakwood Heights. It was a sound that did not belong to this neighborhood of curated tranquility, making the silence that followed even more unnerving. Garrett Reed stood frozen in that silence, his own breath caught somewhere between panic and disbelief. The madness that had propelled him seconds earlier dissolved into something colder horror. He stared at the bullet lodged in the pavement, then at Aisha, who had slipped aside with a spectral ease he could neither accept nor understand. His shock was the opening Aisha had anticipated with military precision. She saw the delay in his reaction, the internal collapse of his confidence, and knew instantly that this was the moment to end the threat. But Garrett's roar shattered the stillness once more. A raw, guttural cry ripped straight from humiliation. He lunged at her, with no form, no tactic, no law left in him. He was an untrained beast, chasing the illusion of control she had taken from him. Aisha moved before his foot even fully left the ground. She accelerated with the speed of a leopard, body coiled and unleashed with pure discipline. She did not meet his force head-on. She exploited it. As he charged, She stepped into the attack, redirecting his weight with a clean, precise motion. Her deflecting strike knocked the gun from his hand, the metal clattering violently across the asphalt and spinning out of his reach. Before Garrett could recover from the disarm, Aisha transitioned fluidly into a joint lock maneuver designed for maximum control with minimum injury. Her hands captured his wrist and elbow with biomechanical accuracy, twisting just enough to overload his ligaments. This was Delta training techniques meant to neutralize soldiers twice her size. She needed him alive for what came next. Dead perpetrators could not face justice. A sharp ripple of pain tore through Garrett's arm as his joints reached their breaking threshold. His balance collapsed instantly, sending his heavy body crashing onto the pavement. The impact reverberated across the street, a dull thud followed by his strangled groan. Dirt smeared across his uniform, sharp pebbles embedded into his skin, and the shock rattled his senses. A mild concussion blurred his vision at the edges, and his aggressive fury dissolved into helpless confusion. But Aisha had already moved on. Her first instinct after neutralizing a threat was not triumph, it was preservation of evidence. She glided across the asphalt with practiced efficiency, reaching the discarded gun and then the impact site of the bullet. Kneeling quickly, she picked up the casing and the deformed slug, wrapping both in a small cloth she carried for emergencies. These items were not just objects, they were truth-proof of Garrett's crime. And in a place like Oakwood Heights, truth had a tendency to disappear unless secured. Across the street, a soft blinking light pulsed in the dim morning haze, red, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. Mrs. Evelyn stood beside her rose garden, her frail frame trembling as petals shimmered around her feet. Yet her hands, clasped around her phone, remained remarkably steady. The fear in her aged eyes was overshadowed by a fierce, righteous determination. Her recording was no longer a video. It had become evidence, a shield, a beam of truth that no corruption could smother. Aisha turned back to Garrett, who lay sprawled on the pavement, breathing heavily, eyes wide with disbelief. Her face carried no smugness, no anger, only a cold, unforgiving clarity. She looked at him as if reflecting every moral failure he had committed, inviting him to confront the truth he had spent years avoiding. When she spoke, the words landed with devastating precision. "I am not the law, but you are definitely a criminal." It was not an insult, it was a verdict. Before the weight of her words fully settled, another sound pierced the air. A distant siren, faint at first, then growing louder, spiraling through the quiet neighborhood, signaling the approach of the official system. The wailing grew sharper, ricocheting between the houses of Oakwood Heights. Aisha's heartbeat did not quicken. Her mind simply shifted modes. The operative within her had finished the engagement. Now the civilian, the victim, had to step forward. She released Garrett completely, stepping several paces back with deliberate softness. Her arms lowered, her shoulders loosened, and the tactical readiness in her stance melted into controlled vulnerability. She looked not like a trained operative, but like a woman who had just survived a terrifying assault. It was not deceit. It was survival. The price of a double life was the ability to reshape one's demeanor at will. The police cruiser skidded to a stop, tires scraping the asphalt. Two officers emerged swiftly, their hands hovering near their holsters, their faces etched with confusion. Their eyes darted across the scene. Garrett writhing on the pavement, Aisha standing with poised distress, and Mrs. Evelyn recording as though she were the conscience of the entire neighborhood. The tension was so thick, it felt like the air itself could shatter. As the first officer approached, Aisha's gaze did not rise to meet his eyes. She ignored his badge, his nameplate, his expression. Instead, her vision sharpened onto a small, almost hidden detail. A partially obscured pin on his lapel, a symbol tiny enough for the untrained eye to overlook. But for Aisha, It was the spark of her next move, and the warning that this encounter was far more dangerous than it appeared. Officer Ethan Smith stepped out of the patrol car, the morning light reflecting off the polished panels of the vehicle as he scanned the chaotic scene unfolding before him. The pristine order of Oakwood Heights had been ruptured. Garrett Reed lay sprawled on the pavement, his uniform smeared with dirt, and his authority shattered like fragile glass. A black woman stood nearby, composed in a way that contradicted the violence that had clearly taken place. Not far behind, Mrs. Evelyn held her phone with trembling hands, recording every breath in the air. A cold shiver ran down Smith's spine. It wasn't fear of danger. He had seen confrontations before, but something about the alignment of these elements felt wrong, dangerously wrong. His attention locked onto the woman, and her gaze locked onto him with equal precision, but she didn't look into his eyes. She looked directly at a point on his lapel, a point nearly too small for others to notice. The glint of sunlight revealed a tiny metallic symbol shaped like an owl. The realization hit her instantly. Aisha recognized the owl as the Watchman, mark and emblem of the underground network woven throughout law enforcement and politics, a system built on manipulation, secrecy, and discretion. That pin was a declaration of allegiance, a badge of corruption hidden in plain sight. Smith's arrival was no coincidence. This was an intervention, a calculated response from the network to contain a rapidly escalating disaster. Aisha's posture shifted subtly, her calm becoming an anchor rather than a mask. She knew she was no longer facing an ordinary officer. She was dealing with a Watchman asset, a double agent acting under quiet orders. And the best part, the part that strengthened her confidence, was that she had spotted it before he realized she knew. Knowledge was the sharpest weapon in this type of battlefield. Smith approached cautiously, the lines on his face tightening with every step. There was no rage in him, no reckless aggression like Garrett. Instead, he radiated the fear of someone caught between two collapsing walls. His loyalty to the Watchman clashed violently with his protocol as a police officer, and the tension was written across his every movement. He wasn't a monster, he was a follower, a subordinate, terrified of the consequences of failure. Aisha read him instantly. Weak link, easily bent, easily broken, but usable. She took a quiet step, closer, smooth enough not to startle the surrounding officers, yet sharp and deliberate enough to slice directly into Smith's awareness. The fluorescent streetlight overhead flickered, casting shifting shadows across her face and making her eyes look colder, more merciless. Her voice entered the space between them like a scalpel, soft yet lethal. I know what the owl on your lapel means, she whispered, her gaze locking him in place. Help me liquidate Garrett by the law, or I will tell everyone how Watchman has been exposed. There was no room for misinterpretation, no bluff, no hesitation, just a precise strike to the weakest part of his armor. Smith's pupils shrank in raw panic, his throat tightening as if the air itself had turned hostile. Her words struck him with clinical precision, slicing through every layer of secrecy he trusted. She shouldn't have known. No civilian, or even most officers, could have recognized the owl symbol. Yet she had not only identified it, she weaponized it flawlessly. In that instant, Smith understood he was standing before someone who operated far beyond his level of clearance. His internal debate lasted less than the rhythm of a heartbeat. Garrett Reed was finished publicly humiliated, recorded, and outed. Keeping him alive in the system would be like storing a lit explosive inside Watchman's headquarters. Removing him wasn't betrayal. It was triage, and protecting himself meant obeying her unspoken command. Smith gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod, a silent contract sealed under duress. The pact was forged in fear and necessity. Garrett Reed would be extracted, erased from the Watchman equation, and Smith, now trapped between loyalty and survival, became Aisha's unwilling informant. Aisha acted instantly. Without breaking eye contact, she touched her wristwatch and executed a hidden command. A silent ping transmitted through encrypted military channels, delivering nothing but her coordinates and urgency level. No conversation, no details. It was the kind of call only elite units understood. Somewhere in a secured command center, Colonel Vance would already be mobilizing CID and DSS operators. Smith did his part. He raised his radio and requested an ambulance with stunning composure, hiding the tremble in his voice behind years of professional habit. The unit he summoned, however, was not from the city's emergency services. It was a Watchman extraction vehicle. A quiet, unmarked van built to disappear compromised assets without leaving a trace. Garrett would never see a public hospital. Aisha gave Smith one final look, calm, unreadable, but colder than the night wind sliding down the street. "I will know if you betray," she said, her tone sinking into him like the weight of a blade. It wasn't a threat. It was a certainty. After the covert pact with Smith was established, a race against time began. The internal ping signal Aisha had just activated was a high-level encrypted alert, but even the fastest response teams from CID, the Criminal Investigation Division, and DSS, the Defense Security Service, would need at least 18 to 22 minutes to disguise themselves and reach the area, without drawing attention. During that time, Aisha had to maintain the perfect victim facade, handle civilian police and curious onlookers, and ensure Smith adhered to the agreement. The waiting was excruciatingly tense. Every passing second was a psychological burden. Aisha stood at the roadside, glancing at her watch without revealing her calculations. She had just been shot at, assaulted, and was now surrounded by officers of uncertain loyalties. She had to ensure every word, every gesture aligned with the image of a citizen freshly traumatized. Her complexion was pale, yet her eyes maintained control. No detail could stray from the script. Crowd pressure and civilian police involvement intensified. Curious neighbors began gathering. Other local officers, those not affiliated with Watchmen, attempted to collect information and approach the injured Garrett. Aisha had to handle rapid-fire questions, awkward reassurances, and prying eyes. She answered briefly, focusing on emphasizing Garrett's unjustified use of a firearm. Her victim persona held firm through absolute professionalism, converting her internal rage into reasonable external fear. Aisha approached Mrs. Evelyn, the elderly neighbor still trembling from the shock, but gripping her phone tightly. She spoke softly, her voice full of gratitude yet edged with tactical direction. "You are the most important witness, Mrs. Evelyn," Aisha said. "Your testimony is the only truth that can protect both of us. Hold on to that video. Do not give it to anyone until my lawyer arrives." Her words not only comforted but solidified Mrs. Evelyn as a vital civilian ally, ensuring the evidence would not fall into Watchman hands. Mrs. Evelyn nodded, her fear giving way to courage. Meanwhile, Officer Smith worked at maximum intensity. He moved through the crowd and fellow officers, constantly managing the situation. He issued sharp orders to isolate the scene, ensuring no one, especially curious junior officers, had any chance to touch the physical evidence Aisha had strategically left behind: Garrett's gun and the remaining casing. He steered the initial report, framing the incident as a shooting caused by Garrett's psychological stress and abuse of authority, exactly matching the secret agreement with Aisha. Tension was visible on Smith's forehead. He was covering up a much larger network by sacrificing Garrett's reputation. Around 10 minutes passed, and a private ambulance bearing faint insignia arrived. Smith personally supervised Garrett's transfer. Still dazed from the mild concussion, Garrett was strapped down and taken away. Smith justified the move as protecting the injured officer and preserving medical privacy, but Aisha knew it was part of the pact. Garrett was being extracted from the hospital under Watchman control, ensuring his silence. Time crawled. 15 minutes. 17 minutes. Aisha maintained absolute vigilance, her eyes continuously scanning surrounding routes. She had to ensure support forces arrived at the precise, calculated moment. Any delay or misstep could crack her cover and pose a national security risk. Exactly 22 minutes after the ping was triggered, a black SUV and an old-looking delivery van appeared 2 houses away from the scene. Neither vehicle bore plates or identifiable markings. Their arrival was subtle, calculated, seamlessly blending into morning traffic. 2 men in civilian clothing, each with entirely different styles. One appearing like a delivery worker, and the other like an ordinary businessman, stepped out. They did not look at Aisha, but headed straight toward the nearby park. Aisha recognized them immediately by their signals and the way they moved. They were CID, DSS operatives, trained to work in civilian environments without detection. Aisha slipped through the crowd, approaching them discreetly under the guise of looking for a place to sit. The exchange happened swiftly. She handed them the copied memory card from Mrs. Evelyn, along with the physical evidence, the bullet casing and bullet she had collected. No words were needed, only a slight nod and an exchanged glance. Their mission: legalize the evidence through military channels and investigate Garrett and Smith from the outside. With the transfer complete, Aisha quietly left the scene, merging into the flow of people and disappearing without drawing attention. She left the situation for Smith and the civilian law system to handle. This action not only protected her cover, but shifted the full burden of evidence and investigation onto Watchman and the corrupt legal system. She knew she had provided enough to ignite a war. Aisha was transported by the undercover CID extraction team to a safe house, an ordinary-looking apartment hidden among rows of aging high-rises in the heart of the city. The building was intentionally unimpressive, blending seamlessly into the anonymity of urban life. Inside, however, it contained a fortified network of encrypted communication relays, biometric locks, and counter-surveillance grids. It was designed for operatives like her people, who existed between legality and invisibility. Even so, Aisha recognized it immediately as only a temporary refuge, a holding space before another storm. Despite the urgency of the situation, her first action wasn't securing evidence or reviewing tactical failures. It was something far more human. She called the babysitter to check on her daughter. The moment she heard Lena's bright, innocent voice chattering in the background, the steel fortress around Aisha's heart loosened just enough for her to breathe. Her tone softened, not out of fear but out of profound relief. Lena remained blissfully unaware of everything that had happened. Silence settled afterward, brief, heavy, and deceptive. Moments later, Colonel Robert Vance stepped into the safe house. The door shut behind him with a muted thud, sealing them both inside a confined space charged with tension. Vance's expression carried none of the controlled stoicism expected of a high-ranking officer. Instead, it reflected disappointment, anger, and a deeper, more personal fear. Over the years, he had trusted Aisha with operations where failure meant national collapse. Now, he felt she had turned that same expertise into a liability. He didn't greet her. He began with accusation. "You just dragged the entire Special Cooperation Command into a county-level abuse of power case," Vance growled, his voice almost trembling with the weight of his anger. His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening as he tried to contain himself. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You exposed yourself from the shadows, exposed us to people who should never have known you existed." His words were sharp, aimed to wound rather than discipline. Aisha didn't react with defensiveness or regret. She met his fury head-on, with a calm that only years of surviving impossible missions could produce. She stepped forward, closing the emotional distance he tried to create. "Garrett Reed is a police officer who used force to kill," she said, her tone unwavering. "He is proof of the rot the military cannot touch. If you do not want to be dragged into this, then ask yourself how long Watchman has been running this country, Robert." Her words cut through his accusations, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth he had been avoiding. The room seemed to darken as Vance exhaled slowly, his anger shifting into a grim recognition. He knew she wasn't wrong. Watchman had been expanding its influence subtly for years, becoming a malignant force that hovered just beyond the military's reach. The corruption had already infected county politics, police leadership, and judicial branches. He had seen the warning signs, but had chosen to stay silent. Vance finally allowed himself to acknowledge it. "Yes, Watchman is a problem," he admitted, his voice lower, stripped of bluster. "A serious one." He rubbed his temples, exhaustion settling into his posture. He agreed to use his intelligence channels to support Aisha, but only unofficially. Direct involvement would expose the command, and exposure meant irreversible geopolitical fallout. Then, he gave her the order he believed was essential for survival. "Withdraw completely. Go dark. Maximum security. Wait for things to settle." But Aisha's refusal was immediate and absolute. She shook her head, a fire burning behind her composure. "I will not hide behind the cover anymore. They attacked me on my home ground. I have to fight openly." In that moment, she signaled a shift, not just in mission parameters, but in identity. She was no longer simply an asset. She was a threat to Watchman. Seeing her resolve, Vance's expression hardened again. He could not stop her, but he had to contain the collateral damage. "You can fight corrupt police," he warned, each word sharp as a blade, "but you are not permitted to reveal your Delta Force identity. If you expose that, you end your career and risk national security." He drew a line between her personal war and the command's obligations. Using his intelligence grid, Vance pulled up encrypted files and projected a brief holographic dossier onto the table. "His name is County Attorney Calvin Hayes," Vance reported. "He's the one covering Garrett's records. He controls legal pressure points and funds upper-level Watchman operations." The profile revealed a man with deep political ties and the arrogance of someone who believed himself untouchable. Aisha studied the dossier, her eyes narrowing. Her enemy was no longer a rogue officer, but a political architect of corruption. In the end, Vance conceded because he knew the truth. Stopping Aisha would be impossible. Containing her, guiding her, mitigating the damage that was his only viable strategy. He agreed to assist her, offering intelligence support, discreet legal channels, and operational shielding. The tension in the room remained thick as iron. Vance looked at her with a conflicted blend of pride and dread. "You've stirred the Queen's nest, Aisha," he said softly, "and this is not the battlefield you want." But Aisha Thorne had already chosen her war. The atmosphere in the safe house grew heavier after Vance confirmed that Calvin Hayes was the true leader of Watchmen. The room, already dim from its blackout-curtained windows, seemed to contract around Aisha as the weight of the revelation settled. To an ordinary operative, this information might have represented a new target, a new mission. To Aisha, however, it was a declaration of war. One waged not in deserts or foreign cities, but in the polished heart of American civics. She understood that the fight ahead would not begin in a courtroom. It needed a shockwave, a preemptive strike, strong enough to crack the invisible armor, protecting Watchman's network. She waited for updates on Garrett Reed, the dangerous variable she had no intention of losing track of. The initial official report stated he had been transferred to the Central Hospital with a shoulder injury and a mild concussion. It was too clean, too prompt, too perfectly documented. Aisha knew better than to trust an official trail that appeared flawless. In her world, perfection was the first sign of manipulation. Moments later, Vance's encrypted update came in a short, clipped transmission that chilled the room. Garrett had vanished. There were no footprints left behind. Transfer logs had been forged with professional precision, and the surveillance system at the hospital had been wiped. Vance confirmed the truth. Garrett had been extracted from the hospital by a fake Watchman ambulance, guarded by a special recovery team. That single action revealed more than any report. Watchmen had discarded legality entirely. They were now operating with the recklessness of an organization desperate to preserve a weapon. Even one as unstable as Garrett, Aisha felt a sharp internal alarm detonate. Not from fear, but from absolute clarity. The game had escalated. Aisha immediately contacted Officer Ethan Smith through the encrypted line she had established earlier. The connection locked in almost instantly, so fast it sent a cold tremor through her spine. It was the kind of speed only a desperate man could produce. Someone who had been hovering over the device, waiting, praying for rescue. Smith's voice emerged trembling, stripped of authority, wrapped in panic and a guilt that was suffocating him from within. Watchmen had cornered him after Garrett's defeat, and every loyalty he once relied on was collapsing like rotten scaffolding. "They're changing the target," he whispered, breath shaking violently. "I tried to cover for Garrett, but Hayes is moving. He wants to send a message to the entire city." His panic surged into a single sentence that detonated through the line like a live round. "Garrett and an elite Watchman team are preparing to assassinate the mayor at the Crown Hotel. The press conference on police reform is about to begin." His words didn't echo. They carved themselves into Aisha's brain. The information hit her with the explosive clarity of battlefield intel. This was no longer corruption, no longer a cover-up. This was a coordinated domestic attack, orchestrated from inside the justice system itself. Watchman wasn't trying to survive. It was trying to reshape the city through bloodshed. Smith's voice cracked under the weight of his own terror as he confirmed Vance's earlier warnings. "Calvin Hayes is directing it. Everything. He wants the mayor dead before the investigation spreads. You have maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes. The countdown to a political assassination." Aisha's mind accelerated into combat speed analysis. Calling Vance's chain of command would trigger hours of verification. The FBI would drown in jurisdiction disputes. Even federal rapid response teams couldn't mobilize without authorization. The mayor would be dead long before help arrived. The equation was brutal and simple. She had to go alone. No backup, no badge, no uniform, only skill and precision. She stripped down her arsenal to essentials. No tactical armor too bulky, no rifle too loud. She selected a hotel service uniform, the perfect camouflage inside a luxury venue where waitstaff flowed unnoticed through hallways and restricted back rooms. From her covert kit, she drew a compact handgun, a stun device, and an encrypted communicator, small tools, for a mission that demanded perfection. Before moving, she contacted Vance. Her voice held steel, but beneath it was a rare tremor of solemnity. "I will stop the assassination. I promise you, Robert. I will only neutralize. I will not kill. Garrett and Hayes must face trial." This was her line in the sand. If she crossed it, she would become the very monster she fought. Vance, shaken but resigned, understood. He gave her a final nod, heavy, strained, almost paternal. The CID vehicle delivered her under absolute secrecy to a narrow alley behind the Crown Hotel. She stepped into the cool shadow between skyscrapers, the muffled hum of the city vibrating through the brick walls. She tightened her apron, adjusted her uniform, checked her weapons chamber. The press conference was minutes away. The mayor's life was ticking down to seconds. Unfolding her map, She traced her infiltration route with surgical focus. Her breath slowed. Her pulse steadied. Every civilian identity, mother, mentor, neighbor, fell away from her like shed skin. Only the operative remained. The Crown Hotel was a magnificent maze of glass and steel, shimmering like a monument to prestige. Inside, the chandelier's massive structures of crystal droplets cast waves of refracted light across the polished marble floor. People moved through the grand hall in elegant clothing, each step echoing soft confidence. Aisha blended into the sea of hotel workers effortlessly, the crisp service uniform erasing her identity as a Delta operative. The silver tray in her hand masked the razor-sharp alertness burning behind her eyes. She moved between banquet tables with fluid grace, mimicking the rhythm of ordinary staff. But internally, every sense had shifted into tactical mode. Her gaze traveled systematically from the mayor's security detail to the clusters of reporters, from suspiciously still guests to the corners where shadows lingered too long. She was searching for the invisible threads of Watchman's strategy. Garrett was incapable of executing a clean political assassination, so someone else had to be in play. Someone much more dangerous. The anomaly surfaced quickly, revealing itself like a predator emerging from camouflage. It wasn't Garrett Reed positioned for the kill, but Governor Terry Shaw, a name that belonged to polished speeches, charity galas, and carefully curated public appearances. Shaw stood near the tall glass window overlooking the city, his posture calm yet calculated. His eyes, unlike those of the smiling guests around him, swept the room with mechanical precision. Aisha saw instantly what others would never notice: the coldness of a man who had already accepted murder as part of his duty. Shaw's vantage point was perfect. Elevated slightly above the mayor's podium, he had a clean, unobstructed angle the moment the mayor stepped into the spotlight. No visible weapon decorated his attire, but Aisha knew the absence of evidence meant nothing. A compact sniper pistol, a suppressed handgun, any elite assassin would conceal them well. Hayes had escalated the situation to maximum lethality, deploying a watchman with flawless political cover and zero emotional weakness. Aisha's mind labeled the setup instantly: kill zone. Any hesitation would result in the mayor's death. She needed to break Shaw's readiness, disrupt his timing, and neutralize him without alerting the entire ballroom. There could be other operatives. Every movement had to be surgical. She approached him carrying a tray with 2 glasses of wine, adopting the careful, slightly timid posture of a service worker trying not to disturb a VIP. Her steps were quiet, deliberate. Shaw sensed her presence before she reached him. His gaze rose, cold and assessing. Their eyes locked. Recognition struck like a spark behind his pupils. "You have made 2 mistakes, Agent," Shaw whispered, his voice as soft as velvet. "This time, you will not escape with words." There was no menace in his tone, only certainty, the chilling confidence of a professional killer acknowledging a target. He knew who she was. He knew her file, her skills, her reputation, and he had been ordered to eliminate both her and the mayor. Words were useless now. Aisha responded with precision, not in speech, but in movement. She tilted the tray just slightly, enough for crimson wine to spill onto Shaw's expensive vest. The spill looked accidental, clumsy, performed with a convincingly apologetic gasp. "I'm so sorry, Governor," she murmured, her voice perfectly trembling. In reality, her free hand was already shifting into a combat-ready position. Shaw reflexively stepped back, his attention momentarily diverted to the stain spreading across his lapel. That single, involuntary reaction was all she needed. Aisha struck. The fight that followed did not disturb a single guest. It was a silent clash of high-level operatives, no wasted movement, no dramatic flailing, just razor-sharp precision. Aisha's hand captured Shaw's elbow in a swift torque, applying just enough force to disable the joint. Simultaneously, Her knee drove into the soft muscle cluster near his thigh, triggering a neurological collapse response. Shaw's breath hitched into a muted groan. His entire body buckled. He crumpled toward the floor, not in a loud fall but in a controlled collapse orchestrated by Aisha's grip. She lowered herself with him, maintaining the illusion that she was simply helping a fainting guest. From the outside, it looked like a staff member assisting a dizzy governor, nothing more. No one suspected that an assassination attempt had just been neutralized. As his body slumped, Shaw's concealed handgun slipped from its holster beneath his vest. It slid across the floor near her foot, its cold metallic surface reflecting the ballroom lights. Picking it up would draw attention, and attention meant ruin. Aisha evaluated the gun's position instantly. Its retrieval would break her disguise and expose her to remaining operatives. She kept the tray balanced in her left hand as she bent over Shaw, whispering through clenched teeth, "Stay down." But the danger was far from over. At that precise moment, the ballroom speakers crackled, and the mayor stepped onto the podium with a bright, confident smile. Applause erupted across the hall. Cameras flashed. Conversations quieted. The entire room shifted its gaze toward the stage, and in that unified movement of hundreds of heads turning, Aisha felt a second wave of danger rising behind her. The primary threat was neutralized, but the battlefield had only just begun to reveal itself. Governor Terry Shaw lay immobilized at Aisha's feet, his suppressed handgun hidden in the shadows. The mayor had already stepped onto the podium, smiling and waving at the voters and media awaiting him. Aisha knew time was no longer measured in minutes, but in seconds. She could not drag Shaw out of the room without drawing attention, and leaving him there too long would immediately raise suspicion from the mayor's security team. She needed a pawn within the system to legitimize the arrest instantly. Without hesitation, Aisha sent a short, encrypted message, consisting of only 2 words to Officer Ethan Smith. "Come now." The message was not simply a request, but a tactical command, ordering Smith to appear at the Crown Hotel immediately, using any emergency pretext needed to breach the restricted area. Smith arrived in less than 5 minutes, his face tense and drenched in sweat beneath the glittering chandelier lights of the hotel. He moved awkwardly through the crowd, struggling to maintain the composed appearance of an officer responding to an urgent call. His eyes instantly locked onto Aisha, who was crouched beside Shaw, creating the illusion of assisting an important guest experiencing a minor mishap. Smith saw Shaw collapsed at her feet, and he understood everything at once. Shaw was a high-ranking watchman sent to ensure the assassination succeeded. His neutralization meant Watchman's plan had completely failed. Aisha looked at Smith, her gaze icy, allowing not even a moment for hesitation or explanation. She had to establish absolute authority right here, using Smith's fear as a weapon. "He cannot breathe," Aisha whispered, just loud enough for Smith to hear, implying Shaw was joint-locked or unconscious. "Protect the mayor, or your organization collapses right now." This was not merely an assertion of dominance. It was a direct threat to the survival of the entire underground network. Smith was forced to choose between saving a high-ranking ally, Shaw, or preventing the total exposure of Watchmen and the onset of an unavoidable federal investigation. Smith's internal conflict was overwhelmed by his survival instinct and fear of organizational collapse. He immediately shifted into emergency response mode. He created a small distraction, legitimizing Shaw's detainment as that of a suspicious man exhibiting unstable behavior and posing a security threat. Smith discreetly confiscated Shaw's suppressed handgun, hiding it inside his own jacket. He made a phone call, urgently reporting to the system that Governor Shaw had suffered a minor stroke and needed to be escorted to the hospital immediately. This move quickly justified the sudden absence of a governor and concealed the assassination attempt. While Smith and several unaware security agents escorted Shaw out, the mayor continued his speech, blissfully unaware that he had just escaped death directly beneath the podium. Aisha's swift intervention completely altered the entire scenario, saving the mayor's life and dismantling Calvin Hayes's ultimate plan. Her mastery in maintaining her hotel staff disguise had saved both her mission and her life. With her objective completed, Aisha withdrew quickly. She placed the now empty silver tray on a nearby dining table and slipped into the kitchen area. She used the tray to obscure her face while walking down the hallway, merging with a group of service staff returning to the preparation area. Her presence was not clearly captured by any security camera, only as an indistinct shadow. She left the Crown Hotel safely, vanishing into the city like a ghost who had finished her mission. In his secret office, County Attorney Calvin Hayes received the report of the catastrophic failure. Governor Shaw, his most trusted operative, had been detained and removed under the guise of a stroke. The mayor was safe and addressing the public. The failure sent the Watchmen network into panic, and Hayes realized that this woman was not merely Garrett's personal adversary. She was a strategic threat to the entire underground organization. The failure was a brutal blow to Hayes's dominance and absolute power. He recognized that this woman was far more dangerous than he had calculated. He had to retaliate with the most personal and ruthless strike. He could not attack her physically, but he could target the one thing more important to her than her own life: her daughter. Hayes activated an emergency communication channel, ordering his lower-tier Watchmen operatives to execute a brutal contingency plan. Minutes after leaving the hotel, Aisha was moving briskly through side streets when she received an encrypted reply on her communication device. The message contained no name, but its tone was cold and merciless, with absolute authority. Hayes knows. The target has changed. A chilling sensation ran down her spine. She knew retaliation was coming, but she could not anticipate how personal or how vicious it would be. Her operative calm nearly shattered. Aisha opened a second message, an attachment. There were no additional threats, only a single encrypted image. She looked at her phone, and the image shattered every steel wall she had built across years of discipline. It was a photo of her daughter, Lena, walking home from school, completely unaware that she was being followed. The angle showed clearly that the enemy was dangerously close. The threat was no longer verbal. It was incontrovertible proof. Aisha stared at the phone. The image of Lena, her daughter, walking along the sidewalk completely unaware that she was being followed, was the most brutal personal attack she had ever endured. In that moment, every ounce of Delta Force discipline, every lesson in emotional control and tactical coldness shattered completely. Her eyes, normally sharp and analytical, shifted into something else, something primal and ferocious. It was the sudden transformation from operative to territorial predator. Immediately after the image, another encrypted message appeared, a clear declaration of personal and merciless war from Calvin Hayes or another high-ranking watchman. You have chosen. Now it is Lena's turn. Taste helplessness, Agent Thorne. The threat was not merely aimed at Lena, it was aimed at Aisha's core. It struck at the only weakness she had spent her life hiding. Aisha felt an overwhelming surge of helplessness, a foreign and horrifying sensation. She was no longer the world's top operative, she was simply a desperate mother. The mother's switch instinct had been activated. She pushed aside every calculation, every strategy she had ever learned. She focused on one goal only: protecting Lena. The enemy had made the catastrophic mistake of believing that threatening her daughter would force her into submission. Instead, it transformed her into an uncontrollable force. Colonel Vance called shortly afterward, his voice filled with concern and an offer of assistance. Aisha, we've detected the threat. We will dispatch a top-secret security team immediately. You must cooperate. Do not act alone. Vance knew this was a personal war, but he believed military forces could protect Lena most effectively. Aisha rejected him sharply. her voice cold and unyielding. The fury of a mother drowned out the respect owed to a superior. The military does not know how to protect Lena. They will arrive too slowly, and they will leave too many traces. Only I know, she said, her voice like steel. She understood that military protection would create an official security perimeter, turning Lena into a public target and making her even more vulnerable. She could not place her daughter's safety in the hands of a bureaucratic system. Aisha immediately began setting up a retreat plan. The air inside the safe house felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in with every second she remained. She could not return home, not with watchmen mobilizing deeper and faster than she expected. She gathered survival gear, medical supplies, forged IDs, and minimal self-defense tools, all packed into a compact backpack built for rapid flight. The plan formed in under 5 minutes, emerging from pure instinct sharpened by decades of clandestine operations. She called Lena next, her voice softening into the rare tone she saved only for her daughter. A calmness carved from instinct, not peace. "Leave through the back door, sweetheart, and go to our special place," she instructed, each word steady despite the storm inside her. Lena, though confused and frightened, obeyed without hesitation. When they finally met, the embrace was tight and breathless, a wordless collision of fear and relief. Aisha held her daughter close enough to feel her racing heartbeat against her own ribs. Their eyes met for only a second, but that second carried the weight of a lifetime. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." It was a promise Aisha had made silently since the day Lena was born, and tonight it became a vow sharpened by danger. Aisha ushered Lena into the prepared vehicle, buckling her in with a tenderness that contrasted violently with the chaos beyond their sight. She started the engine and drove into the night, avoiding every main road. She bypassed surveillance cameras, patrol routes, and predictable exits with flawless precision, relying purely on instinct and geography imprinted into her memory. Her movements were so controlled that it felt less like fleeing and more like orchestrating a silent extraction mission. Lena remained quiet, gripping her seat with small, trembling fingers. She sensed her mother's tension, the rigid jaw, the controlled breathing, the eyes flicking between mirrors, but she trusted her completely. "Mom, where are we going?" she whispered, her voice fragile in the dark. "We're going camping, sweetheart. It'll be safer there," Aisha replied, forcing warmth she did not feel. Her chest tightened with each lie told for love. The road dissolved into forest shadows as civilization faded behind them. Just as the cabin's distant location should have brought relief, a horrifying understanding struck Aisha like ice water. The enemy had found Lena's existence. They had pierced multiple layers of classified protection, bypassed secure identities, and located her daughter within minutes. That level of access was impossible for any local or state actor. Only a high-ranking federal traitor deep inside national security could have breached those walls. She stopped the car at the forest's edge, turning off the engine. Silence wrapped around them, thick and suffocating. Aisha pulled Lena close, feeling the small body cling to her shirt, trusting her without question. Ahead lay nothing but darkness, uncertainty, and decisions no mother should ever have to make. She had to abandon everything: her career, her cover, her government shield. All that remained were her training, her instincts, and the little girl whose hand she refused to let go. The safe cabin, hidden deep within the dense forest, was a crude shelter. It was an isolated location Aisha had purchased years ago under a fabricated identity, a place she believed only Vance and a few individuals in the Special Cooperation Command knew about. Aisha swiftly applied all of her Delta Force survival skills to transform the surrounding area into a new domain, fortified yet flexible. She established rudimentary security perimeters, using natural materials to camouflage the cabin entrance, conceal the water source, and set up silent signal markers. She began teaching Lena how to move between bushes without making a sound, how to recognize danger signs in the environment, and how to communicate through eye signals instead of words. To Lena, it was a serious, secretive game, but the child understood its gravity through her mother's focused eyes and unyielding resolve. The forest's silence did not last long. The very next day, Aisha discovered the first signs of the pursuit team. She found tracks from professional combat boots, not the type worn by casual hikers, but military-grade boots designed to minimize sound. The way the tracks attempted to disguise their presence, yet exposed haste and impatience, showed that this was not local police, but an elite watchman team, likely former soldiers or SWAT officers. They were being led by someone well-versed in tracking targets through rugged terrain. This was a hunt, not a search. A battle of wits and skill began in the damp, shadowed forest. Aisha used slowing and misdirection techniques she had learned from the most advanced training courses. She set simple yet effective traps, stringing thin wires, redirecting branches, and intentionally creating false trails in one direction, before silently veering the opposite way, forcing the pursuit team to split their forces and waste time. Her camouflage techniques were flawless, completely concealing her and Lena from sight and from primitive tracking devices. Aisha's patience was her greatest weapon now. Lena, though frightened and cold, demonstrated remarkable maturity. She followed every instruction perfectly, remaining silent for hours despite the chill and dampness. She even helped Aisha detect an unusual sign, a branch broken lower than a normal adult would reach, something the pursuit team intentionally created as a coded marker. Lena's quick learning and awareness not only helped them survive, but strengthened Aisha's determination. She realized her daughter was stronger than she had ever imagined. However, Aisha's worry surged the moment she found the subtle but undeniable signs that the enemy had already mapped this area. Footprints arranged in staggered formation, broken branches placed deliberately, and a faint chemical scent from military-grade tracking spray. These were not the marks of amateurs. The pursuit team moved with precision, using tactics only trained operatives would recognize. They were navigating the forest as if they had been here before. This was the final confirmation. Someone inside national security had leaked the location of her most hidden refuge. The forest, once her sanctuary, now felt hostile, almost sentient in its silence. The towering pines blocked out the moonlight so completely that the shadows seemed to breathe. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep, every distant snap of a twig like a signal. The air was damp and heavy, clinging to her skin as if warning her that the wilderness no longer belonged to her. Staying hidden was not a strategy anymore. It was a slow, closing trap. Aisha's instincts screamed the truth. The enemy was no longer operating as a small, corrupt network. Their tactics, precision, and reach were too advanced. The pursuit team was using military tracking patterns, flanking routes, and terrain familiarity that only insiders would have access to. Someone with federal clearance had betrayed her. Protecting Lena meant abandoning the defensive stance completely. She had to become the hunter again. She pulled out the emergency encrypted device, its metallic case warm against her palm. Activating it sent a soft vibration up her arm, a reminder of the danger she was inviting by making contact. Whispering into the small microphone, she kept her voice low, careful not to let it echo in the trees. "Robert, you have to tell me the true extent of County Attorney Calvin Hayes's power," she said. "He is using federal-level resources. Who is he protecting, Robert?" Vance's reply carried dread through the static, raw, unfiltered fear she had rarely heard from him. He admitted the situation was spiraling beyond control, far faster than their systems could adapt. He promised to dig deeper, but Aisha knew he was running out of time just as she was. The enemy had already moved several steps ahead. She smashed the device against a rock without hesitation, sparks flickering like dying fireflies. The forest swallowed the darkness again, indifferent to the war unfolding beneath its canopy. Aisha made her final choice, with brutal clarity. There would be no more running. She guided Lena carefully, moving opposite the pursuit team's path. They were heading directly toward the source of danger, the office of Calvin Hayes himself. At the forest's jagged edge, Aisha dropped to one knee and cupped Lena's face gently. The girl's eyes, wide, frightened, but determined, searched her mother's. "I have to find the one in charge," Aisha said softly, yet firmly. "You stay here, and you must promise me something. Trust no one but me. If anyone finds you, hide until I return. Do you remember the silent signals I taught you?" Lena nodded, her small fists clenched with silent resolve. It was the heaviest burden Aisha had ever placed on her child, and the most necessary. After securing Lena in a hiding place so concealed that even she herself would need time and skill to relocate it, Aisha returned to the city. Her target was the building housing the office of County Attorney Calvin Hayes, a fortress of power built upon corruption and political control. Night had fallen, providing the perfect cover for a covert infiltration. Aisha used her full arsenal of advanced break-in skills, bypassing the building's complex electronic security barriers and its layered physical defenses. She neutralized motion sensors and thermal cameras with precision, handled mechanical locks with an almost artistic finesse. She moved through the darkness like a ghost, leaving behind no physical or digital trace. The precision in every step and every movement was proof of thousands of hours of unforgiving training. Hayes's office was located on the top floor, a spacious room adorned with walnut wood and marble, offering a panoramic view of the city buried in darkness. The room radiated a cold, distant authority. Aisha knew the most important evidence would not be inside the visible safe, but in the hard drive of his personal computer, protected by multiple layers of complex encryption. She swiftly tackled the computer's encryption and firewalls using a compact data harvesting device. Cold sweat of concentration formed on her forehead, but her hands remained calm and perfectly steady. As the files began to download, she scanned through directories and emails, searching for keywords related to watchmen and illegal operations. Within minutes, she found irrefutable proof. The highly encrypted documents confirmed that County Attorney Calvin Hayes was the leader of the Watchmen. He was not merely a member, he was the architect, the man who ordered the cover-ups of Garrett Reed's crimes and the mayoral assassination attempt carried out by Governor Shaw. The evidence linked Hayes to high-ranking police officers, judges, and even political figures. These files mapped out a vast network of corruption woven into every layer of city governance. The documents included detailed logs of abuses of power, secret agreements dividing illicit profits, and internal punishment orders for those who dared oppose them. Aisha collected every critical file, ensuring each piece of evidence carried a clear digital footprint and timestamp so it could be used in civil or military court. This was not simply revenge, it was justice, an attempt to cripple the Watchmen network at its foundation. She knew she was holding the downfall of a decades-long corrupt empire. Just as the data transfer neared completion, a voice echoed unexpectedly through the room. Hayes's voice, deep, icy, and authoritative, came through a hidden speaker system. "You have overestimated righteousness, Thorne. Law is a tool, and I am the one holding it." Hayes had detected her infiltration through a silent alarm wired directly into his computer, a defensive layer she had underestimated. He was somewhere nearby, watching her through hidden cameras. Aisha did not flinch. Not when the alarms in Hayes's system flickered, not when the room's temperature seemed to tighten around her, and not when the risk of being caught loomed like a shadow behind every second. She knew infiltration into the enemy's central base meant discovery was inevitable. She continued transferring the files with unwavering precision, her eyes fixed on the progress bar as if nothing else existed. Hayes's voice crackled through the speakers, dripping with venom in an attempt to shake her concentration. "I do not use tools, Hayes. I use truth," she replied coolly, her voice slicing through the digital silence with surgical precision. The room around her hummed with the faint vibration of servers processing stolen data, but her tone remained unwavering. There was no bravado, no attempt to sound brave, only the cold confidence of someone who already held the advantage. The knowledge that the evidence lay safely beyond Hayes's reach fortified her like armor. She would not give him fear. The final seconds ticked down like detonator clicks, each one echoing in her pulse. When the extraction bar reached completion, Aisha triggered the one-time encrypted channel to Colonel Vance. The transfer shot through the system in an instant, pure, invisible lightning, disappearing into a military vault no civilian could ever touch. Even if Hayes captured her, even if he buried her in accusations or bullets, the evidence would rise. It was her contingency plan, designed to outlive her body if necessary. Before leaving, she moved toward Hayes's imposing oak desk. The desk radiated authority, thick, polished, heavy, an altar to his ego and the illusion of control he had built over the city. From her pocket, she pulled the spent casing from Garrett's handgun, the metallic surface reflecting the cold fluorescent lights. She placed it gently on top of Hayes's documents, letting it sit there like a silent verdict. It wasn't just evidence. It was a declaration. She ghosted through the corridor with the fluid precision of someone who had memorized every inch of the building's layout. Each step was deliberate yet silent, her breath controlled, her senses heightened. But the moment she pushed open the final exit and stepped into the open air, the world erupted. Sirens, dozens of them cut through the atmosphere, converging with predatory hunger. Hayes had unleashed a citywide alert, not to arrest her, but to crush the truth before it found daylight. Meanwhile, deep inside his hidden control room, Hayes stared at the dead security feed. His jaw locked so tightly that veins bulged along his neck. His fury didn't explode outward. It imploded, shaking him from the inside like a contained blast. She had taken the evidence. She had marked his desk with a taunt sharper than any knife. And worst of all, she had done it without fear. Hayes understood something with chilling clarity. Aisha Thorne was not an adversary he could intimidate or corrupt. To break her, he would need to strike somewhere else, somewhere she could not defend with tactics or training. He needed to find her true weakness. Calvin Hayes sat inside his secret control room, a fortified chamber buried beneath the county attorney's headquarters, surrounded by humming servers and encrypted monitors. The dim red glow from emergency lights cast harsh shadows across his face, sharpening the cruelty already carved into his features. His rage had burned past the point of impulsive emotion. It had condensed into a chilling, calculated coldness. He had been struck at the very center of his power. And the worst part wasn't the loss of evidence. It was the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by a single operative. He leaned closer to the empty monitor, showing the breached storage vault, fingers tapping rhythmically against the steel desk. Aisha Thorne was no longer an inconvenience. She was a threat, a trained elimination operative who had now turned her skills against him. Her defiance had forced his hand, and he knew any hesitation would fracture the entire Watchman network. Panic was already crawling through the ranks, and Hayes could smell fear like blood in the water. Without a moment's delay, Hayes activated ultra-secret communication channels, lines buried so deeply within federal systems that even top-level oversight committees didn't know they existed. His commands went out like silent daggers to embedded Watchman operatives inside federal bureaus, intelligence departments, and political offices. "Find her weakness," he ordered. "Not her body, her credibility." Physical attacks would only provide her with more incriminating evidence. The battlefield he chose was the one he dominated: public perception and the law. Using elite hackers and trusted political saboteurs, Hayes launched a digital assault against Aisha's past. Although Delta Force records remained impenetrable, he probed deeper into forgotten archives, old mission fragments, internal reviews, stored tactical briefs from war zones. These were the documents people rarely checked, stored on outdated servers, often ignored, but still potent when twisted. Hayes smirked as he uncovered controversial battlefield decisions contextual in war, but damning when stripped of truth. He began crafting the narrative. Decisions made under fire became executions. Tactical sacrifices became abuse. Protection of intelligence assets became unauthorized covert actions. He weaponized the harshest legal terminology with surgical cruelty. His goal wasn't justice. It was transformation, turning Aisha from a decorated operative into a public monster. Meanwhile, Colonel Vance sat alone in his dim operations office, the silence broken only by the hum of encrypted machines. Blue light flickered across his tense expression as he scanned classified alerts. When the military channel confirmed Hayes's attempt to breach Aisha's sealed history, Vance's heart dropped into a cold pit. Those files were supposed to be untouchable. Only a handful of individuals in the nation even knew they existed. His composure cracked for the first time in years. Vance grabbed the encrypted phone. "Aisha, he is going after your past," he said, voice tight with urgency. "He found old files, things we buried for a reason. Prepare for a public attack on your honor. It will be worse than anything you've faced." It wasn't rank speaking, nor duty, it was fear for a soldier he had mentored, a woman he respected deeply. Aisha listened in the shadows of the wilderness, her figure half-lit by pale moonlight filtering through the trees. Her calm was astonishing, but it was the calm of a strategist, not denial. Her mind was already dissecting Hayes's moves, assembling legal responses, identifying which channels could safely leak the Watchman evidence. She knew she had minutes, not hours. The sting of injustice rose in her chest, sharp and suffocating, but she forced her heartbeat steady. She would not let emotion guide her. Not now. Hayes's desperation had peeled away the last layers of civility he pretended to possess. He was no longer a polished county leader standing for law and justice. He was a cornered criminal, ready to scorch the earth. He knew precisely what Aisha's evidence could do. If it reached daylight, his empire built on intimidation, secrecy, and carefully curated lies would collapse. So he launched the cruelest form of political survival: character destruction. To maximize theatrical impact, Hayes arranged an emergency press conference in the grand lobby of the county attorney's headquarters. The marble walls gleamed behind him, carved with the words justice and duty symbols he would weaponize to mask his corruption. The official podium stood beneath bright lighting, ensuring every camera would capture him as the embodiment of lawful authority. He prepared to distort truths, twist classified details, and exploit public suspicion toward Black Ops operatives. Aisha didn't need to hear the speech to know its contents. He would call her unstable. He would brand her uncontrollable. He would paint her as a rogue threat to national security. Standing amidst the forest's freezing air, Aisha pulled her jacket tighter around Lena, who was resting nearby. Leaves rustled softly, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Aisha stared upward at the sliver of moonlight cutting through the branches, feeling the weight of the battle looming ahead. She accepted, fully and without hesitation, that her reputation might never recover. Even if she saved the city, even if she exposed Hayes, she might live the rest of her life as a villain in the public eye. But that was the price of protecting her daughter. And she did not waver. Calvin Hayes stood rigidly at the hastily assembled podium outside the county attorney's headquarters, the marble steps behind him illuminated by relentless camera flashes. Each burst of light carved sharp, cold angles across his face, creating a grotesque contrast between the polished public official and the ruthless manipulator beneath. Reporters crowded shoulder to shoulder, microphones stretching toward him like hungry claws. Hayes inhaled deeply, adjusting his tie with theatrical composure. This was his stage, his attempt to rewrite the narrative and bury Aisha Thorne beneath an avalanche of manufactured disgrace. He began with a dramatic flourish, his voice booming through amplified speakers. He accused Aisha of being a war criminal, a rogue operative, a national threat hiding behind a mask of motherhood. His hands waved distorted sheets of military records, fragmented excerpts stolen and ripped from context, portraying her as a ghost of violence from foreign soil. Every word he spoke was sharpened with legal jargon meant to overwhelm, confuse, and terrify the public. Hayes pushed forward with more venom, attacking the Department of Defense directly. He accused the military of concealing the truth about a dangerous elite operative who supposedly left devastation in her wake. He questioned the integrity of the government, using his badge as a shield while condemning Aisha for crimes she never committed. His performance was perfectly engineered outrage, authority, sympathy, all blended into a poisonous cocktail. Then he leveled his final blow. Aisha had used her identity as a single mother to evade justice while plotting threats against American officials. He concluded with a chilling demand that federal agencies arrest Aisha Thorne immediately. In seconds, the public reaction fractured like glass. Those who trusted Hayes's position and the spectacle he orchestrated recoiled in fear, convinced a criminal was on the loose. Others, those who had followed the mayor's reform movement and had heard whispers of Garrett Reed's violence, felt a tremor of doubt. Hayes's story was grand, but something felt manufactured. Before the crowd could settle into belief or skepticism, the atmosphere shifted. Reporters turned as a ripple of shock spread through the audience. Footsteps approached, not frantic, but deliberate. Aisha emerged from the edge of the crowd, stepping into the full blaze of cameras. She did not hide, she did not shrink, and she did not come as a frightened woman, fleeing accusations. She came under her official title approved by Vance himself. Special Operations Consultant. The battlefield had changed, and she had stepped onto it willingly. Her appearance shocked Hayes, who never imagined she would dare to face the press and live cameras head-on. She wore a simple yet commanding suit, her hair tied neatly back, her eyes cold but utterly composed. Her calmness contrasted sharply with Hayes's aggressive bluster, creating a powerful visual divide on the live broadcasts. Aisha walked straight toward the podium with the steady resolve of someone stepping into a battlefield. The bright floodlights washed over her face, casting sharp shadows behind her, forcing Calvin Hayes to stumble back a half step. Reporters gasped, cameras swiveled, and the entire lobby froze. She did not deny her past, nor disguise the weight of the decisions she had made in war. She carried them openly, like scars earned in service. Mr. Hayes attacks my past because he cannot face his crimes in the present, she declared, her voice slicing through the chaos. She continued before Hayes could interrupt, each word projected with a fierce precision that pulled every journalist's attention toward her. Ask him about Garrett Reed, the officer who drew a gun on an innocent woman. Ask him about Governor Terry Shaw, apprehended in the middle of an assassination plot against the mayor. Ask him about the owl pin worn by corrupt officers who serve his hidden agenda. She turned their spotlight away from rumors about her past and onto the threat infecting their city. Something real, immediate, and terrifying. Aisha raised a small encrypted drive, its metallic surface gleaming beneath the lights. She didn't expose its contents, not yet, but referenced the documents, recordings, and data she had taken from Hayes's office. "I am not a war criminal. I am a witness," she said, steady and composed. "I will testify in court. I will present every piece of evidence to a jury and to federal justice where County Attorney Hayes has no authority to bury truth." Her declaration was not only a promise, but a binding contract on a national stage. The shift in the room was instantaneous. Colonel Vance, already armed with the full evidence package, contacted trusted officials in the DOJ and members of Congress. Within minutes, the FBI, under mounting pressure, announced a formal investigation into Calvin Hayes and the Watchmen Network. The media storm pivoted violently. Reporters shouted questions at Hayes, pressing him about Garrett Reed, the owl symbol, and the assassination attempt. His rehearsed confidence collapsed, his voice faltered, and sweat gathered on his brow. Despite the accusations hurled at her, Aisha won the moral battlefield. She had embraced the truth of her past instead of fleeing from it, turning Hayes's attack into proof of his desperation and guilt. Cameras captured the moment his anger twisted into humiliation. Consequences struck swiftly. Under federal investigation and facing public outrage, Hayes was suspended from his DA position within hours. His political influence shattered. The Watchmen Network trembled. Aisha looked directly into the nearest camera. Her face was calm, but carved with exhaustion. She had won this round, but deep inside, she knew the personal danger had only evolved. The real war was just beginning. After the intense media battle, where Aisha had managed to shift public opinion, but her reputation remained damaged, she was moved to a more secure location, under the indirect protection of the Special Cooperation Command. There, she began the process of preparing for the historic trial ahead. She could no longer hide the truth about herself, and now she had to confront it under the public glare of the civilian legal system. Aisha and Vance's attorney team, a group of military legal specialists assigned to assist as special advisors, prepared for the trial. They knew the tension was at its peak, because the opposition, led by the lawyers hired by Calvin Hayes, would attempt to launch a fierce attack on her identity as a special operations consultant. They would use accusations of war crimes and distorted records to undermine her testimony, turning her from a witness into an unreliable figure in the eyes of the jury. Aisha faced hours of brutal mock interrogations, where she was forced to answer the most difficult questions about her past, the life-or-death decisions she had made overseas, and how she used force during the confrontation with Garrett Reed. This preparation was not only legal, but psychological. She had to learn how to control her emotions when personal and professional secrets were exposed. She had to learn to accept the truth that her secret life was over, and that her honor would now have to be protected with truth and unwavering resolve before the public. She donned her new legal armor: transparency, truth, and an unshakable determination. Aisha's greatest salvation and reinforcement of credibility came from her courageous civilian alliance, Missus. Evelyn, the neighbor who had filmed Garrett's attack, along with other victims of Garrett Reed, had decided to testify. These were ordinary citizens with no political or military motives, people who simply wanted justice for themselves and for the community. Their testimony was the only evidence the Watchmen could not distort or dismiss as the work of the military or part of some larger conspiracy. They would provide honest accounts of Garrett's abuse of power and violent behavior, which would strengthen every accusation Aisha made about the Watchmen Network. The narrative describes the subtle threats the witnesses faced from remaining Watchmen members: mysterious late-night phone calls, suspicious cars parked near their homes with headlights deliberately shining into their windows, and quiet warnings from acquaintances within the community. This was not direct violence, but calculated psychological intimidation meant to shake their resolve before the trial began. Yet, they refused to back down. Their outrage toward police misconduct and their admiration for Aisha's courage reinforced their determination, turning them into silent warriors in the battle against corruption. They decided that their safety and conscience depended on exposing the truth. Though suspended from office, Calvin Hayes continued to use legal tricks to obstruct the process. He hired an elite team of attorneys, paid with the Watchman's enormous black budget, to exploit every legal loophole to delay the trial or dismiss Aisha's evidence. He attempted to demand Aisha's full records from the Department of Defense, putting pressure on Vance. However, his arrogance cost him allies. Many lower-level watchmen began to abandon him, fearing they would be implicated in the federal FBI investigation now underway. He grew increasingly isolated, left only with anger and desperation as the truth closed in around him. The trial was not just about Garrett Reed or Hayes, but about the clash between two forces. The narrative contrasts Aisha's grounded confidence with the frantic concealment attempts of Garrett and Hayes. Aisha was calm, cold, and equipped with the truth and the solid legal evidence she had risked her life to obtain. She did not need to lie or hide. Meanwhile, Garrett, mentally shattered and abandoned by his lawyers, was nothing more than an impulsive and easily aggravated man, and Hayes had to rely on dirty legal maneuvers to avoid facing the truth. A crucial element of Vance's strategy was the evidence of Hayes's manipulation of records. Vance had prepared a detailed report proving that Hayes not only tried to cover up Garrett's crimes, but also intentionally falsified and distorted military documents to slander Aisha. This turned the stolen documents, originally evidence of corruption, into undeniable proof of Hayes's obstruction of justice. This strategy transformed the attack on Aisha's past into Hayes's Achilles heel, revealing his desperation. When the trial day arrived, the atmosphere in the courtroom was unbearably tense. The courtroom was packed with reporters, members of the public, and government officials. Security was doubled, with undercover FBI agents operating throughout the area. This was a trial about the credibility of the entire city's police system and legal institutions. Everyone knew the outcome would reshape public perception of fairness, and whether a shadow organization could truly operate above the law. The judge entered the room, striking the gavel 3 decisive times. Everyone rose, and silence fell over the room. A silence so heavy, it seemed to crush the air itself. Aisha, sitting beside her attorney, stared directly at the jury, her expression unwavering. She was no longer afraid or running. The air in the courtroom was suffocatingly heavy, so dense that each breath felt like it disturbed the fragile tension holding the room together. A hush had descended over the packed gallery, so absolute that even the faint, rhythmic tapping of a clerk's pencil sounded like a hammer. The trial was no longer about physical force or tactical combat. It was about intellect, truth, and the fragile trust between citizens and the law. Every eye was locked on the witness stand. Every heartbeat seemed synchronized in anticipation. The first witness was Mrs. Evelyn, the elderly neighbor who had recorded the confrontation. She stepped forward with trembling hands, her silver hair neatly combed despite the visible nerves gripping her. Her voice quivered, yet her testimony flowed with striking clarity. She described Garrett Reed's escalating aggression, the shouting, the drawn gun, the blatant abuse of authority. She recounted how Aisha's movement, swift, instinctive, had saved her life by inches. Her honesty was disarming, her sincerity undeniable. With each detail, Mrs. Evelyn's courage tightened the atmosphere. She spoke of how the peaceful street of Oakwood Heights had transformed into a battleground of terror and power. Her frail figure contrasted painfully with the brutality she described, forcing the jury to confront the harsh truth. An ordinary citizen had witnessed an extraordinary display of unchecked violence. Her determined gaze scanned the courtroom, as if daring anyone to deny what she had seen. Other civilian witnesses followed, bolstering her account. Some were shaken, some emotional, but all were consistent. By the time the prosecution concluded the civilian testimonies, the narrative of Garrett Reed's misconduct stood solid as concrete. The courtroom's attention then shifted, almost magnetically, to Aisha Thorne. Aisha stepped forward under the formal title Special Operations Consultant. She wore no uniform, no medals, no visible symbols of her covert life. Yet her posture, calmness, and precision radiated an authority stronger than any badge. She approached the witness stand, not as a victim or soldier, but as a technical expert. When she spoke, her tone was even, clinical, describing bullet trajectory, angle of discharge, and inconsistencies in Garrett's official report. Her words were factual, sharpened to avoid even the appearance of emotional bias. She analyzed the position of the gun, the direction of the miss, and the relative timing between Garrett's command and his shot. She described her response as neutralizing an unnecessarily armed threat based on immediate threat assessment. Her mastery of details stunned the courtroom and made it nearly impossible for the defense to paint her as irrational, impulsive. Sensing danger, Hayes's defense team launched their most vicious attack. They presented the distorted military documents Hayes had dug up, twisted fragments of missions where context was deliberately removed. The attorney stepped forward with predatory confidence. "Miss Thorne," he snarled, "are you a war criminal as these reports suggest? Do you habitually exceed authority? How many people did you kill to build this career?" His voice dripped with accusation. The courtroom gasped. But Aisha did not flinch. She slowly looked from the jury to the attorney, her expression unshaken. "I am here to speak about the truth of that day, not the past," she answered. Her voice was steady as a held blade. Mr. Hayes and Garrett Reed fabricate lies because the truth terrifies them. If they had evidence of crimes, they would not need to distort my records. The real issue is corruption and their manipulation of files. Her controlled redirection cut the defense cleanly. Then came Vance's legal ambush. Aisha's attorney introduced the physical evidence, encrypted files, emails, access logs from Hayes's system. The digital trail Aisha had recovered became a devastating weapon. It revealed Hayes's tampering with Garrett's disciplinary history, his manipulation of investigative records, and his coordination with the Watchman network. The jury saw diagrams, timestamps, and recovered deleted files, all linking Hayes to a long-running pattern of corruption and obstruction. The impact was seismic. Garrett Reed, seated beside his attorney, began to unravel completely. His breathing turned erratic, his face flushed with rage. As the evidence mounted, his self-control snapped. He leapt to his feet, eyes wild, shouting at Aisha, "You lying bitch! You and those traitors will pay! I will find your daughter!" His voice echoed like a violent thunderclap across the courtroom. Security tackled him instantly. His outburst, violent, profane, threatening a child, became living evidence of everything the prosecution had argued. As for Hayes, the collapse was quieter, but far more devastating. His face drained of color as each incriminating file was displayed. His attorney whispered frantically. But Hayes was frozen, staring into the abyss of his ruined career. When the deleted logs and altered files were shown, he bowed his head. The arrogance that once defined him had evaporated, replaced by naked terror. After closing arguments, the judge declared a recess. The jury deliberated for 12 excruciating hours. Outside the courthouse, the city vibrated with tension. News vans camped on sidewalks, commentators debated ethics and abuse of power, and public opinion hardened like drying cement. Inside a secure waiting room, Aisha sat in silence. She worried not about evidence, she trusted the truth. What alarmed her was whether the jury could resist political pressure and public hysteria. Vance stayed beside her, offering reassurance, but Aisha's quiet, focused stare revealed she was ready for any outcome. Finally, the bell rang. The jury returned, each member wearing an expression carved from gravity. The judge ordered the courtroom to rise. Every pair of eyes, reporters, citizens, officers, Hayes, Garrett, locked onto him. The air thickened one last time. The verdict was moments away. The courtroom sank into near absolute silence as the judge cleared his throat, preparing to deliver the verdict. Aisha stood tall, her face revealing no emotion. But inside, her heart pounded with the speed of a sprinter at full stride. She looked at Garrett, who still wore a hopeless expression of contempt and smugness, clinging to the belief that Hayes's power could save him from the consequences of the law. The judge began reading the jury's decision, his voice firm and echoing throughout the chamber. The verdict for Garrett. On the charge of threatening with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant, Garrett Reed, guilty. On the charge of racially motivated misconduct and abuse of power, we find the defendant guilty. The room held its breath as every eye fixed on Garrett. The judge continued, his tone unwavering and merciless. The court sentences the defendant, Garrett Reed, to 15 years in prison, without the possibility of reduced time, due to his direct endangerment of a civilian's life, his severe abuse of entrusted authority, and his profound lack of remorse. The reaction was immediate. Garrett erupted in rage, attempting to lunge toward Aisha with wild, hateful eyes. "No way! I am a cop! She is the liar! Hayes, save me!" he screamed, but was instantly subdued and handcuffed with cold metal restraints. His violent resistance only reinforced Aisha's portrayal of him as a dangerous, uncontrolled aggressor. Meanwhile, Mrs. Evelyn and the other victims of Garrett exhaled collectively a long, emotional sigh of relief after months of fear. Tears streamed down their faces as justice was finally, unmistakably delivered before the public eye. The consequences for Hayes were even more severe. Moments after Garrett was sentenced, a federal prosecutor entered the courtroom, formally announcing a corruption investigation against Hayes. Calvin Hayes was officially charged with obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and organized corruption. He was immediately suspended from his position as district attorney and escorted out of the courtroom in stunned disbelief shared by him and the supporters who once viewed him as untouchable. His downfall was not merely a legal defeat. He lost all power to manipulate the system. And the local Watchman network collapsed instantly. He departed in humiliating silence, a stark contrast to the commanding authority he once projected from the podium. The narrative depicted the rapid collapse of Watchmen with almost clinical brutality. Remaining members inside the courtroom and others watching the broadcast from secret safe houses froze as the guilty verdict echoed across the nation. These figures, once cold, disciplined, and calculative, began frantically erasing their digital footprints, sacrificing alliances, and abandoning covert channels. Fear rippled through their ranks like a virus, consuming the network from the inside. Hayes's fall was more than a personal defeat. It was the destruction of their political shield. Panic mutated into betrayal. Cells that once operated with deadly coordination now devolved into scattered individuals racing to outrun the FBI. Former allies turned into liabilities, and every whisper carried the threat of exposure. Watchmen, once predators lurking beneath institutions, now fled into shadows as fugitives fractured, leaderless, and hunted. Their empire had crumbled with terrifying speed. Hayes's collapse was the final fracture, the death blow no one expected. Aisha watched Hayes being escorted away, wrists bound, head bowed. This justice had come not through fists, weapons, or ambushes methods she understood too well, but through evidence, law, and the undeniable weight of truth. She walked quietly out the back exit of the courthouse, slipping away from the growing frenzy of reporters who shouted her name and chased headlines. The war was won, but the cost was carved into her identity. Her anonymity, her greatest protection, was gone forever. Outside, Vance stood waiting. His posture remained formal, a soldier's frame carved from discipline, but his expression carried a warmth rarely seen. "You did what our system could not," he said, voice low and reverent. "You confronted corruption at its root, and prevailed. You're no longer an operative in the shadows, Aisha. Your identity is public now, and fame unwanted as it is will follow you." His words acknowledged both her victory and the new dangers ahead. The social impact radiated across the city and the nation like a shockwave. News outlets declared it a landmark triumph over abuse of power. Images of Aisha and Mrs. Evelyn filled front pages, symbolizing courage and civic resistance. Citizens who once felt powerless now believed that a single person's bravery could dismantle an entire corrupt structure. Trust, long lost, began resurfacing slowly, painfully. Under immense public pressure, the police department enacted emergency reforms. Watchman officers were suspended, arrested, or interrogated. Their hidden hierarchy disintegrated as federal investigators pried into every corner of their operations. The city began the difficult but necessary process of reconstruction, rebuilding public faith and accountability, brick by brick. Aisha finally entered a secured room inside the courthouse, a place shielded from reporters, agents, and exhaustion. She walked into the small bathroom, turned on the bright fluorescent light, and stared into the mirror. Her face looked thinner, sharper, marked by sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Yet her eyes, the eyes once defined by fear and relentless alertness, now reflected something new. A quiet, unshakable resolve. She had completed her mission. She had delivered justice not just for herself, but for her community, and she was ready for whatever came next. Several weeks after the historic verdict that shook the local legal system, and as headlines across federal news channels continued dissecting every detail of the trial, Aisha met Colonel Vance inside a top-secret military safe facility. The building was buried beneath layers of reinforced steel and concrete, designed to withstand both physical attacks and electronic surveillance. The meeting room itself was sterile, white, silent, a chamber stripped of identity, as though denying the existence of emotion. Only 2 chairs, a dark wooden table, and a suffocating stillness filled the space. Aisha felt the weight of this silence more heavily than the weight of gunfire. Vance entered with a rigid posture, the kind he used when delivering orders that tasted like betrayal even to himself. His expression was grim, carved with responsibility and regret. When he finally spoke, his words carried the tone of a funeral announcement. He informed Aisha that a reassessment had concluded she could never return to traditional Delta Force missions. Her identity was too public now. Her face too widely circulated. Her involvement in a high-profile legal war had complicated everything, turning her into an intelligence risk the command could not afford. Aisha absorbed the verdict with a composed expression, but her chest tightened. A door that defined her entire adult life had been slammed shut. Before she could fully process the loss, Vance slid a thick folder across the table. The folder's weight felt disproportionate for its size, as if it carried her entire future. He met her eyes with a solemn respect. The Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Pentagon all agree you're the only person who can do this. The offer was staggering. A federal mandate. She would oversee the National Counterterrorism and Anti-Violence Reform Program as a special consultant. It was a mission to retrain state police, federal agents, tactical units, everyone to prevent abuses like Watchmen from ever emerging again. She was to rebuild the foundation of enforcement, using the ethics and precision she learned in Delta. Her battlefield expertise would become the backbone of systemic reform. But Aisha felt a battlefield erupt inside herself. One part of her, the operative forged through war, secrecy, and autonomy, recoiled from the offer. The military system had failed her, exposed her, and endangered her daughter. Joining the system felt contradictory to everything she had just fought. Yet another part of her, the mother. The strategist recognized the scale of the opportunity. Real reform had never been possible for someone in the shadows. Now, she had the chance to reshape a nation's enforcement culture from within. She hesitated, staring at the documents. This decision would alter everything. The deciding factor came softly, in the form of her daughter, Lena. A life on the run. A life of anonymity, constant danger, and shifting identities would shape Lena's entire future. But this job, even dangerous and political, would grant federal protection. It would allow Lena to attend school, to sleep peacefully, to have a mother who wasn't disappearing every night on covert missions. Aisha exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. She made the decision for Lena's safety and stability. She accepted the offer. The conversation closed on a solemn handshake, a gesture of heavy agreement and mutual understanding. Aisha began work immediately, pouring her operational intensity into designing the national training protocols. She created simulation programs for threat assessment, rules of escalation, situational psychology, and controlled force. She rewrote entire sections of training doctrine, emphasizing preservation of life above tactical convenience. Her drills were brutal in discipline, but ethical in purpose, mirroring the strictest combat standards of Delta Force. Yet, skepticism shadowed her every step. As she built the program, she questioned the system's motives. Did they truly want change? Or were they simply using her as a public shield, a symbol to calm outrage? She sensed the subtle movements of resistance, the sideways glances from certain officials, the soft dismissals from bureaucrats, the faint pressure from politicians who preferred cosmetic reform. She knew Watchmen had not been eradicated. Hayes was only a pawn. The true architects were still hidden in federal corridors, watching her closely. So, Aisha made a silent vow. She would use this position not merely to reform, but to infiltrate, to observe, identify, and dismantle the higher-ranking Watchmen operatives who still thrived in Washington's shadows. A new chapter of paradoxes began. Her life became public. Her face on magazines, her name mentioned in political debates, yet the true war she fought remained covert. She moved into a modern office in Washington, D.C., with bulletproof windows and federal agents stationed outside her door. But the loneliness was sharp. Politics was a battlefield with no clear enemy lines. Alliances were temporary. Smiles were masks. She had to learn to navigate meetings that lasted longer than firefights. Vance's final warning echoed in her mind like a prophecy whispered before a storm. Aisha, Hayes was only a sacrificial pawn. The higher enemies are still watching. They already tried to eliminate you once. They will try again, the moment you threaten their power. His voice hardened. This mission may be more dangerous than any combat op you've ever faced, because now, the enemies will sit beside you. Now sitting in her high-rise Washington office, Aisha watched the Capitol glowing beneath the morning sun. Cars moved like veins in a living organism, bureaucrats hustled, senators debated, federal agents blended into the city fabric. She accepted all the risks for Lena, and for the countless lives Watchmen had endangered. She had stepped into the machine she once despised. But she had done so, not to obey it, but to change it from within. And she knew the greatest challenge ahead was not the training. It was the transformation of a system built to resist change. 1 year had passed since the historic trial that toppled the power of Calvin Hayes and Garrett Reed. 1 full year of quiet that Aisha had fought with her own life to secure. She and Lena lived peacefully in a small, discreet home on the outskirts of Virginia, protected closely by federal agencies, yet still afforded enough privacy for them to finally breathe freely. Lena had slowly grown accustomed to her new life, adapting to school, joining extracurricular activities, and making new friends. She no longer lived in constant fear. And seeing her daughter laugh freely brought Aisha a deep sense of fulfillment that no victorious mission could ever provide. Aisha's new success as a reform consultant was undeniable and publicly recognized. The counterterrorism enforcement reform program she had built was now implemented nationwide, receiving praise from lawmakers, the public, and even progressive police officers. She was respected by colleagues and high-ranking officials for her professionalism, her indisputable skill set, and her seamless ability to combine ethics with tactics. Yet Aisha never fully trusted that respect. She knew her success was tolerated by the very system she was trying to change, and she remained acutely aware of hidden agendas, recognizing that respect was only a thin facade. Even as a public official, the habits of an operative were ingrained into Aisha's blood, woven into every action of her daily life. Every morning, before Lena woke, Aisha checked exit routes and reviewed the electronic and physical security systems around the house. In meetings, she always sat with her back to the wall, scanned rooms quickly for potential threats, and never ate or drank anything she hadn't personally vetted. She never allowed herself to relax her vigilance, viewing every moment of quiet as an enemy tactic of waiting. She knew not all watchmen had been arrested, and the higher-level enemies Vance had warned her about still hid in the shadows, patiently waiting for the right moment. The quiet they were enjoying was emphasized by the narrative as artificial. It was a necessary pause, a temporary rest before a larger storm. It mirrored the deadly silence before an earthquake. Aisha often awoke in the middle of the night, not because of nightmares, but because she was listening to the silence, waiting for an unusual sound that never came. She understood very well that in the world of intelligence and military strategy, prolonged calm was often the sign of an impending threat, an enemy regrouping and preparing to strike. One crisp morning, driven by a habit she could never break, Aisha went for a run. She moved along the familiar tree-lined road, her body operating with the precision and efficiency of a perfectly calibrated combat machine. Suddenly, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked a short distance away, a dark gray sedan with tinted windows, lacking any identifiable license plate or markings. It did not move the entire time she ran, yet its presence shattered the fragile equilibrium around her. She memorized every detail, the tire type, the faint silhouette of the driver, and instinctively increased her pace without revealing her awareness. When she returned home, after completing her routine perimeter check and finding no signs of intrusion, Aisha felt something was wrong. A subtle shift in the air, a familiar, chilling sensation, the feeling of being observed with precision. She found a nameless package left neatly on her doorstep, placed in a spot so conspicuous it felt like a challenge. It had been handled professionally, no postage, no sender address, and no fingerprints. It was wrapped in a special waterproof, fire-resistant material, the kind used exclusively in covert operations. This was not the work of an amateur. It was a message from a professional organization with significant resources. Aisha immediately brought the package into the security room, an armored, electronically isolated space. She used professional tools to open it, treating it like a timed explosive. She photographed each layer of wrapping, each tiny detail. Inside was a small USB drive, highly encrypted and made of a matte black metal, the type typically used in high-level intelligence operations. It was placed in a small vacuum-sealed plastic pouch. There was no accompanying message, no symbol, no markings beyond the manufacturer's imprint. Clearly, it came from someone who knew exactly who she was, what she did, and what she needed. She stepped back, staring at the USB. She knew it could contain a digital trap, a dangerous virus capable of breaching government systems, or a direct threat to Lena. But it could also contain the information she had been searching for, intel on the higher-level Watchmen network. It might be evidence of Project Rise, the upper echelon of Watchmen unaffected by Hayes's downfall, the ones waiting for the right moment to strike. Her final decision came after a short but intense internal struggle. Professional curiosity and her hunger for justice outweighed caution. She could not ignore it. Her war was not over. She inserted the USB into an encrypted computer, an isolated device, unconnected to government networks, stored inside her secure basement. The monitor lit up as streams of coded characters began decrypting, signaling an extremely high and complex level of information security. Aisha sat inside her secure bunker, the steel-reinforced, electronically isolated room, lit only by the glow of her encrypted workstation. She had spent nearly half an hour breaking through the USB's layered security, a process requiring patience and expertise, mastered only by the highest-tier intelligence operatives. After a successful decryption, the single file inside the USB opened. The entire computer screen immediately shifted to a deep slate blue, displaying only one simple, chilling line of text. No graphics, no emblem. Initiation protocol. Thorn. The words blinked slowly, steadily, with an authority that filled the room with a new, suffocating tension. Aisha tightened her grip on the pistol already placed on the desk, her eyes fixed on the screen, every sense ignited. Moments later, a deep male voice echoed through the workstation's speakers. The voice was so heavily encrypted, it erased any identifiable traits. No age, no origin, no emotion. It sounded mechanical, precise, and absolutely dominant. Whoever was speaking was no amateur hacker, no local organization. This was a message from an entity with intelligence resources rivaling Delta Force, perhaps surpassing it. The next line spoken was not an invitation, not a proposal, it was a verdict. We have been observing. You have passed the first threshold. The voice did not ask whether she wished to participate. It declared she had already been chosen with or without her consent. The tether, that invisible, undeniable bond between her and the clandestine world she had tried to abandon, was now sealed. Aisha understood instantly. Her entire battle with Garrett and Hayes, the exposure of Watchmen, all of it had been a test for something larger, a proving ground for her skill, her resolve, her code, and above all, her unwavering allegiance to truth. The voice continued, explaining briefly that Hayes's downfall and the collapse of the local Watchmen chapter were merely necessary purges removing weak, exposed links. It implied that Watchmen was just a surface-level rot, a disposable layer built to shield the higher network from scrutiny. Your integrity throughout that conflict is a valued asset. Truth is the strongest weapon, and you know how to wield it. The message revealed a worldview both ruthless and manipulative. Power mattered. But honesty, when weaponized properly, mattered even more. Then came the final line, delivered with devastating weight. A sentence that sent an icy jolt down Aisha's spine, not due to fear, but due to comprehension. If you are hearing this, your test has already begun. The screen went black. The USB immediately initiated a digital self-destruct sequence, wiping itself clean, leaving no trace, no recoverable data. The bunker fell into total darkness once more. Aisha did not react with panic. She stood still for a long moment, a cold awareness snaking down her back, not dread, but recognition. This was not a request. This was an activation, a mark, a selection she could not erase. A switch had been flipped, pulling her back into a war she had believed finished. Her peace had never been real. It had merely been permitted. The new truth she faced was brutal. Watchmen was only the crude, low-level rot. Project Rise represented a higher, endless war, an echelon of power that manipulated everything from the shadows, turning public political chaos into childish theater. This organization was not bound by law or national borders. Its goals stretched far beyond corruption. It sought control order, reshaping the world under a doctrine it believed was necessary and eternal. Even after finding stability for Lena and a legitimate position within the government, Aisha felt a surge of battle readiness roar back to life. She placed the now neutralized USB into her covert storage box, beside the handgun she had not drawn in over a year. She knew her true place was not behind a desk in Washington, D.C. Her place was in the war against the forces that had dragged her out of a normal life. Her reform program would become a perfect cover, a legal shield, a Trojan horse allowing her to hunt these ghosts from within the system. Aisha left the bunker and climbed to the main floor, where daylight and the simplicity of family life waited. One chapter had closed, but this was the start of a much larger, far more dangerous one. She stood before the window, looking out at the peaceful suburban neighborhood, her gaze sharpened, cold, precise, unblinking the gaze of a warrior stepping back into the battlefield. She accepted the truth. She could not live an ordinary life. She was a combatant, and her mission now stretched far beyond justice. The story of Aisha Thorne is not only a dramatic personal journey, it is a profound lesson on the power of integrity and courage when facing corrupt authority. The greatest lesson to be taken is this: justice does not come naturally. It demands sacrifice, steadfastness, and the willingness to fight not only against violent individuals on the streets, but also against the shadowy forces of power hidden deep within the system. Aisha has taught us that even when an entire structure collapses, truth remains the strongest weapon with which to rebuild. We invite you to look beyond Aisha's personal story. This is a collective call. Question authority. Stay vigilant against decay, even when it disguises itself with the appearance of prestige or the cloak of law. If a lone woman can shake a covert organization operating at a federal scale, then the collective strength of all of us is limitless. Hold on to your truth, protect the vulnerable, and never accept abuse of power as an inevitable part of life. If this inspiring and dramatic story has made you reflect, feel motivated, or recognize valuable lessons, share it so more people can learn and take action together. We are committed to continuing to bring you the most exceptional and meaningful content. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring stories about integrity, courage, and the relentless fight for justice. Thank you for your support.